Okay, this is going to be part of lesson 1.3, and we're going to talk about subtraction of whole numbers. So just like we did earlier, we added numbers that were whole numbers. Now we're going to subtract, okay? And when we say subtract, we're going to take away. What is that? How does that look like on a number line? So we'll use this as an example. So we've got our number line here. So for example, we had $8 minus $5. How many dollars is that at the end? So if you have 8, you take away 5, the answer is 3. But how does that look like from a number line in this case? So you would probably start out here and go all the way to the 5. And then what is the difference? Right? So we're looking at what the difference is. So here's how we're going to handle this. We're going to start off with 8, which is what we're going to end up with. Okay, and if you see 8 and this is 5, what's the difference between 8 and the 5? It's 3 is the difference. That's how you see it on a number line. Okay, so now let's talk about what do you call each number. In this case, we're subtracting. Okay, this is called minuend. This is called subtrahend. And this is called the difference. Okay, that's what you call each one. If you'll recall, when you're adding, they have a different name. It's called add in, and sum. In this case, it's minuend, subtrahend, and then the difference. Now then, how do we subtract? Okay, so if we look at this number, and if the book or if your assignment says subtract that number minus that number, we're still talking about ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, lining them up. So when we're looking at that, here's how I would line those up. Okay, if we're looking at the number itself, so if we're looking at that number itself, we've already lined up our ones, tens, hundreds, and so forth, right? So now we can subtract the top from the bottom. So 5 minus 2 is 3. 5 minus 3 is 2. 9 minus 4 is 5. 8 minus 2 equals 6. That is your answer. So you've subtracted your subtrahend plus the difference equals the minuend in this case. Now then, let's talk about another example. So if it's asking us to subtract 692 minus 378, okay, how would we do that in this case? So because 2 is actually less than 8, we're going to have to borrow. And we're going to borrow from the 9. So when we borrow from the 9s, which is in the tens place, and 8 is in the tens place. So we're going to carry over that 1. So this would actually become 12. So now 12 minus 8, that would be 4. Okay, and we borrowed 1 from here, so that makes that an 8. So now then 8 minus 7 is a 1. 6 minus 3 is a 3. And that's how you borrow. And you could actually, in some circumstances, you may have to borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow. Just make sure that you keep up and you actually keep updating what those new numbers are going to be. So then, with that being said, when you read somewhere or whenever you read your instructions for homework or anything and you see where it says minus, less than, less, the difference between, decreased by, that means you've got to subtract. So that's the way that the book would be asking you to subtract. Now then, we talked about estimation. Remember this wavy line? Okay. So now then, let's talk about estimation. So if we were to calculate minus, I'm lining up my numbers like I have been this whole time. If I'm going to calculate that, okay, so subtract to find the exact answer. We're going to subtract to find the exact answer. And we can do that right now. So that would be 2 minus 2 is 0. Oh, we're going to have to borrow. That makes that a 10. So then now that's a 9. Since we borrowed, that's a 4. Guess what? We're going to have to borrow again. That makes that a 2. 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay. Now then we've made that a 2. So, oh, guess what? We're going to have to borrow again. So when we borrow, that turns into a 1. And that's going to turn into a 4. And now then we're going to have to borrow one more time. That makes that a 2. That is now an 11, 10, 9, and you bring down your 2. So if you did that, if you subtracted, this is your answer. But when you do estimation, and we're going to estimate, we're going to round, in this case, I'm going to ask y'all to round each number to the same place value. So in this case, we're going to round to the nearest 10,000. So when we round to the nearest 10,000, we are looking, if we were looking at 323,502, rounding to the nearest 10,000 is we're focusing on that number right there. Okay? So, if we're rounding, okay, wait a minute. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so if we're rounding, that would mean that we have to look at the number to the right, which is a 3. So that means that, because it's 4 or less, when you round, that is what you would get. Now then, when you look at this one, we are looking at that, and that means that that would convert itself to that number right there. Okay, so now then when you subtract, you're going to get 290. You see how close they are? Now, if you got a wild number, whatever, then you know you're way off. That's why estimation is important, and that's why it's being shown, because it gives you a quick way to think, okay, so if I estimated, then I would know that if my answer is correct.